Ah yes, Red Bull, the energy drink company that's now known just as much for its participation in freakishly extreme sports as it is for its can of bull piss they sell as a drink. Since deciding to buy a team in the so-called pinnacle of motorsport in 2005, Red Bull have had a pretty decent time here. In the span of 18 years, they've managed to solidify the Red Bull name in the history books of Formula 1. In fact, they'll soon be on the level of Lotus and Mercedes in terms of championship wins, and in terms of Grand Prix wins, they are the third greatest team in history. While it's far from fun to watch, this year Red Bull have managed to put on literally the most dominant performance ever seen in Formula 1. It makes F1 an absolute snooze fest and has me genuinely questioning my passion for the sport. But on the other hand, you gotta hand it to them. It's mighty impressive. I mean, the seemingly most unbreakable record in F1 was recently broken by Max Verstappen. 10 wins in a bloody row. One more than previous record holder Sebastian Vettel, who of course was also a Red Bull driver when he set said record. At this point, even Max looks to be bored of all the winning and has resorted to other methods to keep himself entertained during this mind-numbing era of Formula 1. Obviously, it's his own fault, but you can't hate on a man for winning. After all, his father didn't abandon him at a gas station to see him come second. I think the poor guy just doesn't want it to happen again. Anyway, I think you get my point here. Red Bull isn't exactly a team to be toyed with, but once upon a time, making that statement would have had you alienated from any functioning society. You see, when Red Bull first made their entrance into the sport in 2005, they obviously weren't the fastest team out there. They were of course essentially still the same struggling team they purchased from Jaguar the previous year, only with Steve from Minecraft replacing Mark Webber. But to their credit, they managed to perform infinitely better under their new name. The next year, after originally searching for a new engine partner since the team's purchase in 2004, Red Bull swapped out their Ford Cosworth engines in favor of Ferrari's shiny new 2.4-liter V8 for the 2006 season. That same year, we also saw the inception of Red Bull's junior team, Scuderia Toro Rosso, a team that was made purely for the sake of training and testing junior Red Bull drivers, and a team that was expected to finish way behind Red Bull due to their absolutely astronomical differences in budgets. It was reported that Toro Rosso had operated on a laughable $66 million budget in 2006, while their sister team were running on a much more comfortable $200 million budget. So they stuck to the status quo and finished 15 points behind Red Bull. But clearly that Ferrari engine wasn't cutting it, right? So in 2007, Red Bull switched to Renault engines instead. As if that would change anything. I mean, sure, they finished in 5th place, their all-time greatest finish at the time, but only because McLaren were disqualified for pulling a Mission Impossible on some Ferrari documents. Also, considering the drivers were literally driving a nuke on 4 wheels, they didn't do too bad at all. Then 2008 came around and things were looking up for Red Bull. They had a pretty freaking great start to the season, not counting Australia obviously, that race was something else entirely. A 7-race points finish streak meant that after the French Grand Prix, they had amassed a total of 24 points, and they weren't even halfway through the season yet. At this rate, they could nicely put together their greatest season yet, right? Wrong. It turned out that Renault engine was actually a piece of crap, and oh yeah, I forgot to mention, the upgrade package Toro Rosso brought in Monaco was essentially the Red Bull chassis, only this one had a much better Ferrari engine inside. How ironic. But at this point, Toro Rosso only had a measly 7 points though, so obviously Red Bull were clear. Right? Wrong again, mate. Red Bull's second half of the season was merely a shadow when compared to their first. DNFs were plenty and neither driver nor car could score points. Whereas on the junior team side of things, that Vettel guy was really starting to find his footing over there. He put some absolutely stunning performances on in Monaco, Spain, Belgium, Singapore, and Brazil. But while those were good races for him, one stood out a whole lot more. A rainy weekend awaited the paddock in Monza. Not the conditions most drivers would particularly love to see, but seeing as unlike today they actually raced in the wet back then, qualifying went on. Now, for the viewer, the general rule is that you don't know what to expect on a rainy weekend. The weather can make it so that with the right driver, even a 1.2-liter Volkswagen Polo could score some points. In those conditions, the drivers were indeed the greatest factor. On the Red Bull side of things, it was a disappointing afternoon for David Coulthard, who couldn't make it to Q2 and could only squeeze a P13 out of the car. Hey, that kind of reminds me of someone. Anyway, the Aussie on the other hand smacked a banger lap on the board in Q3, putting him in a much more impressive P3. Now, although that sounds good for Webber, guess who also made it to Q3? That's right, the junior boys. Bourdais managed a solid lap, good enough for a fairly comfortable P4. And as the qualifying session approached a close, the final laps were being made, one more Toro Rosso had yet to cross the line. And as it did, the numbers didn't lie. Sebastian Vettel, out of God knows where, whipped out a magical lap to put himself and that Toro Rosso on pole. The next day, it was race day, of course, and now the time had come for Sebastian Vettel to deliver and bring home a solid result for the team. Let's be honest, a podium would have sufficed for the team, but not for Seb, it wouldn't have. In short, a treacherous race awaited. But man, did this guy put on a show. From lap 1, he had an amazing start and pulled away from the much faster McLaren behind him. Conditions were so tricky, you had action left and right. Vettel's control was world class, while veterans of the sport behind him were displaying Pastor Maldonado-esque qualities. Finally, the checkered flag was out, and what do you know, suddenly F1 had a new race winner. That, all coupled with a solid remainder of the season, meant that ultimately, Toro Rosso beat Red Bull in the standings by a whopping 10 points. Now, I was 4 years old at the time, likely still pissing the bed, so I think it's obvious I wasn't reading newspapers or watching TV to know what the media coverage of this whole fiasco was like. But looking back on whatever news articles I can read from the time, it seems that the media was extremely focused on Vettel and Toro Rosso's great performance, which is fair, but I don't see much about just how bad Red Bull was that year. At the end of the day, remember that Red Bull was supposed to be the leading team, the team Toro Rosso drivers aspired to one day race for, not their freaking competition. But yeah, Red Bull was an absolute clown show in 2008. Looking back, I found it quite funny and wanted to shed some light on it, because things are looking all too well for Red Bull right now, and quite frankly, it bores me. Anyway, that's about all I've got to say. Like and subscribe if you want to see more of whatever this is, and with that, I'll see you later. Bye bye.